The video that we watched that featured Deb Weinstein, who is a crisis management monopolizer, I would say, because just her things that she's talking about and the various resources she's discussing and the strategies she has are just brilliant. And it's so simple, and it's interesting to me how simple all these concepts are that we're constantly discussing and that we've discussed throughout the course. And yet it seems so complex and complicated when you compare it to something like Carnival Cruise Lines, which she also did. I have to admit, in the beginning, I was distracted by her presentation skills because I feel like she just never took a breath. And that's another thing I kind of laughed. It's kind of irrelevant to the topic, but it kind of made me laugh when I was watching it because PR has such a broad spectrum of individuals, and you have so many different characters, and they're so brilliant, and they're just kind of all over the map. So I had to kind of laugh that off and just remind myself, like, hey, we're in PR. We're not. It's not like a serious black and white business that, or I don't know, like finance, for example, or some kind of thing like that, where this person is just going to have a monotone voice and be very official and on point with presenting and presentation skills. But I just thought that was interesting. After I laughed it off and I wasn't so distracted by it, it kind of added to her points and what she was saying and how you have to get your audience excited about what you're saying. And although in the beginning it was distracted, I'm never going to forget how she presented and what she said. And also she brought up a lot of things that we've discussed in the class about how social media has gone from a nice to have thing to now it's a need to have thing, and organizations who don't monopolize on that luxury or that availability or that resource ultimately are shooting themselves in the foot and just disabling their corporation, organization, company, whatever you want to call it. And that's basically what we saw with Carnival Cruise Lines. And she brought up the Costa Concordia issue, tragedy, and the same Carnival Cruise Line tragedy, or I would say crisis, that wasn't necessarily a tragedy, the crisis when the engine room of the cruise line or cruise ship caught fire, and then they were stranded in the Indian Ocean for 3 days of hell, which is what the passengers called it. And even since then, there have been a couple more issues where we just recently saw that a bunch of people got sick on the cruise line. And consistently, there's this pattern with Carnival Cruise Line's CEO and with the media team or whatever. It almost feels like they don't have a media team. And I feel that Deb Weinstein really touched base on that and showed us the importance and how almost silly it is that they don't monopolize on this resource that they're given by technology. And it was also, I think, almost insulting that their excuse during the Costa Concordia tragedy was that they were taking a break from social media out of respect for the tragedy, and they were just going to focus on cleaning up the mess. When, like she said, in doing that, they made themselves have a bigger mess. So they could have very easily kept their customers informed, kept their audience aware, and offer their customers something in compensation. And as we know, they did very little to meet those expectations of their company, their stakeholders, and all that. And that's the same thing that we've also discussed in class about stakeholders, how important they are to your company. And Carnival Cruise Line consistently just demolishes that and doesn't do it. And the other thing that she said that was interesting to me was, it was kind of funny too, is she said what they did is basically like shutting down the loony bin, leaving and letting the lunatics run the show, which ultimately is what Costa Concordia did, or Carnival Cruise Lines did, with letting the captain of Costa Concordia consistently speak to media outlets, consistently defend himself openly, and consistently he just said ridiculous statements. They had no real guidelines, or there was clearly a lack of a crisis management plan in place. And we would hope that after such a tragedy where there was loss of life and environmental damage, that the company would work to revolutionize their communication with the media and their communication with their stakeholders and within their organization so that they have an efficient crisis management plan in place. As we have seen with the recent crises and tragedies and everything that's surrounding that company, it doesn't seem like they're doing that. And that's the most frustrating thing, I think, for us in public relations and even for the average individual, because you constantly see, I mean, obviously they're still holding cruises, they're still going out, so they have a pretty sufficient market to be able to continue to do those things. So it's clear that there's people who are like, oh, let me put some hope in them. I don't really believe them. I've had a good experience with them, so I'm going to go out and do it, and I'm going to invest in them as a stakeholder. And yet, time and time again, they fail. And they fail their stakeholders. They fail their own employees. They fail just their organizational image. And I think that's ultimately what Deb Weinstein was talking about when she said that it's a sink or swim market. So you have to monopolize the resources you're given. You have to be open, and not open in the sense where you leave yourself open for attack. You have to be open in a sense that you're going to be open and communicative to your stakeholders, to your organization, to your peers and your competitors in a way that provides yourself a defense mechanism. So you're always going to be a step ahead. And like we're learning about crisis management plans, in having that kind of communication or that kind of plan in place, you're always a step ahead. You're always prepared for the worst. And hopefully we'll see a certain development take place, or a potential change in management or crisis communication with Carnival Cruise Lines that will give us some hope for their communication and give us some hope and in the way that PR is taking effect in the corporate world. And I know I'm personally been very frustrated by this situation, and it's clear Deb Weinstein was frustrated, and I'm sure a lot of us in PR are. So that's really what I felt that I got from her video. I felt really satisfied with her video. I think she's really hilarious and such a character, but I really overall think that she touched base on everything that we've discussed this course, and it was a really interesting and enlightening lecture, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to watch it. Have a good night.